the Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with legendary Yes guitarist Steve Howe.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to The Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. His name is now enshrined in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with that of most of his famous band, Yes. And the depth and breadth of his musical projects and connections has seen him work with pretty much every influential artist in the progressive rock world over the past 50 years. Here after the break to chat about his incredible career and Yes's upcoming show at the Mobile Sanger Theater is none other than guitarist Steve Howe. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight is enshrined with his band Yes in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's considered by many to be one of the greatest guitarists of all time. From his group projects to his solo efforts, he's given the world an incredible gift with his music and skill. Here to chat about his incredible career, as well as the Classic Tales of Yes tour, which is making a stop right here at the Mobile Sanger Theater on October 13th, is none other than guitarist Steve Howe. Steve, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, David.
I'd like to start somewhat at the beginning of your relationship with the guitar. What originally drew you so magnetically to the guitar as opposed to perhaps maybe some other type of instrument?
Yeah, it could have been perchance that my parents had a lot of 78 actually of Les Paul and Mary Ford, and they were sensational records. I mean, they still hold up today. So by the time I was 10, I'd heard these records quite a bit, and I didn't even kind of realize that also they had Tennessee Ernie Ford records with two great guitarists on it, Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant. So, it's my parents' fault, really, I think. There was so much guitar, but at the same time, of course, in London, by 1960, there was so much impetus on rock and roll. And people like Chuck Berry and Bill Haley, and it was whipped up a storm with me, really, and I just loved the guitar. It was the era, of course, of the guitar instrumental too, so it couldn't have happened at a sort of more quintessential time.
I believe I read somewhere that the first electric you owned was a Japanese guitar. I don't want to mispronounce the name, but I want to say Gaiatone.
That's right. There were two make names on a guitar. Hank Marvin of the Shadows fame with Cliff Richard, before he got his Stratocaster, he was playing one of these guitars. So it was weird. There was a kid in my street, wanted to sell his electric guitar, and I had just a cello guitar. So the first electric I bought after about 2 years of playing was a Gaiatone, but they're also called Antorias as well. So, but LG50, I think it seems to be the name. And yeah, it was a very small guitar, very small. The body was actually really titchy, had a bit of a Fender one-sided headstock, and two very, kind of noticeable gold-looking plain gold pickups. But it did have a sort of Stratocaster sort of twang about it. So, but it was the first guitar I could get my hands on that also came with an amp. So this one came with its own kind of amp that went with the model. I think, so, I had a guitar and an amp, and all I needed was a volume pedal. Now, I knew I needed a volume pedal just intrinsically. There was something about the way pedal steel players played, and I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that, if I was going to play a guitar, I needed to control it in some way, and the only thing you could get at the time was a volume pedal. So I thought I could get one of them. So, but the other thing you need is a tuner, but they weren't so available at the time. You used a pitchfork or a tuning thing. It's all very crude compared to, the digital tuner of today. But everything was simple then, and it was great fun, guitar and amp, and I was set.
Is there any chance you still have that guitar?
I have one of those. I have a guitar the same, and I've had it for a very long time. But I'm confused, as many things were after psychedelia, because I definitely had it before psychedelia. I did stuff to it, like I put cardboard on it, painted cardboard, and I kind of psychedeliced it up a bit. And then I really can't swear if it's the same one, but it actually might be, because there's a a missing bit on it, and that seems to keep telling me that maybe it is the original. But why I would buy another one, I don't know, when I was already progressing into far greater guitars. So yeah, there you are.
When you went to pick your next guitar, what drew you to the Gibson ES 175 that would become such a big part of your story?
Yeah, there was an interim purchase. I got a Burns, I don't know, dual sonic, I think it was called, duo sonic, had two pickups and I think I had a tremolo arm. It was a British guitar. Burns were a British guitar. So, but I don't know, I never got off the ground with that guitar for long. So you're right. It came around to Christmas 1959, and I kind of pleaded with my parents that I really needed a really good guitar. I mean, not a Burns and not an Entoria, but something like really good. So I was pretty pushy, after only playing, no, I'd been playing for 5 years by then. So I put up with the Entoria and the Burns. And then when it came to my 17th year, I wanted to get this wonderful guitar. And I said, well, how much is it? And I said, well, it's 200 guineas, which at the time was a currency that doesn't exist now. It's like £1 and a shilling, times 200. So like, well, 200 guineas. So I was prepared to pay the installments on a couple of years, what we call hire purchase. I can't remember what you call it, but credit,
Like layaway.
And my dad put down an amazing £40 on this guitar. I mean, it was really amazing. That was a ton of money at the time. And I guess they'd seen me play in a couple of bands and they thought I had some potential, So they said, well, as long as you pay the installments, we'll buy it. So we went to the guitar shop and they didn't have one. I was like, what, you haven't got an ES 175D? They said, no, we can order it. It'll be in a couple of months. So I was so desperate for that guitar, I was prepared to wait. So I waited. And then when it came, of course, I was thrilled to bits. And it became, I still think it's one of the most beautiful electric guitars ever made. But when I got it, I got home and put it in the corner and just stood there just sat there looking at it like, wow. But, it had iconic kind of shapes about it. Not everybody was playing one. In fact, really, nobody was playing one in the popular music era. It really was jazz guitar. And I had pictures of Wes Montgomery playing it, Herb Ellis, Jim Hall. Everybody played this. Well, 175. See, the D is for the double pickup. I knew I wanted the two pickups. So I hope this isn't getting too technical for anybody. But, the without the D, it's purely a jazz guitar because you only got the front pickup, which is that lovely warm sound. So I'd seen lots of jazzers play it, and a guy called Judd Proctor, who many people might remember if those have the years I do. He was a guitarist. He may have even been Ronnie Donegan's guitarist, or he was a solo guitarist in his own right, and he recorded few records which showed his skill. So there he was, great shape, great thing. The only thing I didn't know was, what was it going to sound like in rock? But I didn't kind of care, it was going to be my guitar, and I got a Fender amp sometime after that. I had Vox for a while, and that was really great. I mean, the Vox amps were terrific, and so were the Fenders. So once I got something that really could make a noise in a club, in a pub, in a small theater, and the venues I was playing, I could crank it up and get a good sound.
Is it true you slept with the guitar while on the road when you were worried about the area you guys were staying in?
Yeah, I have to confess, it's partly for its own security.
Yeah,
I would offer as my claim. It was a weird thing to do. I was pretty, I think it was in New York, and I think it was when Yes came to play their first show with Jethro Tull, opening for Jethro Tull. But for some reason we went to, there were reasons. We went to New York, and at the time we were actually terrified by New York. We had a fire station next to us, which seemed to erupt with sirens every couple of hours. We were trying to sleep. It was hot. And there was some very dodgy people out on the streets. We weren't used to seeing people like this, hustlers and bustlers, So that night, one of those nights, I don't know, I just, I guess I'd been practicing on it, put it in my bed. I thought it was the safest place for it. It's next to me. If they're going to get me, the only way they can get that guitar is to get me first. So I was looking after it. Yeah, it's quite a funny story.
Well, it kind of reminds me of a story the legendary Al Cooper told me on the show about a guitar Jimi Hendrix gave him. He eventually had to sell it, I think, because his apartment kept getting broken into because people thought he had the guitar in there. And so he just sold it, let it be known that it got sold, I guess, so that it wouldn't be an issue anymore.
Don't come to me anymore.
So your time in Yes is rightly enshrined in the annals of rock history. So I was wondering, what was your first impression of that first session with the guys in Yes? What was your memory of that first and that's the session that's kind of stayed with you all these years?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty powerful because I didn't really, I mean, I was open to offers. So when they said, "Oh, come down and audition for Yes," I mean, I'd heard of this band, I had a reputation. I didn't know that Chris was the same bass player was in the group Sin that I had opened or played with on stages. So anyway, so I go down there and I had a very powerful impression. It kind of started almost like backwards. I kind of went, when I heard them playing in the room and they were jamming and we started to play something, and I heard Bill playing and I kind of went, wow, that's the kind of drummer I'd kind of like to play with. And then I look at Chris, he's like all over the bass, really hot bass, Tony Kaye's got this wonderful Hammond organ sound. And then suddenly, John opens his mouth, John Anderson's, the voice, of Yes in the 70s so much, 80s and things, but 90s. So basically 2000s. So John's voice, so it was a collective power, if you like, but it kind of triggered in the sort of from the ground upwards kind of thing. So yeah, I was well impressed, and I thought, well, get my foot in the door with this band. It's the kind of band I was looking for, where I felt, possibly we were equal craftsmen in our skill. We'd put in, I'd put in 10 years, on the guitar to find that spot where I was at that point. And it was really a question of, did they like me? And I loved a quote later that came out that Bill thought I was a bit of a hippie, and that was no secret. And but they were too. But Bill was most probably a little bit of a straighter guy than some of the other guys were. And but I knew that, I sensed that if I got in with this and helped to make this great, then it might be a big thing. It was a good gamble to take.
Speaking of the Yes album, I mean, one of the all-time greatest, in my mind at least. What do you consider to be your biggest or greatest contribution to the album? Was it a lyric or a riff or something, some songwriting idea, or something else entirely?
Not really. I think it was more about me as a guitarist and an ideas person. Songs. I had songs. I had some songs. And eventually, John and I started writing together a lot more. But on that album, the collaborations were a little bit more cut and dried. Sure, I wrote Clap and helped in parts with Yours No Disgrace and Starship Trooper, and most probably a few others. But basically, John Anderson, Chris Squire had already formulated the kind of position of strength of the songwriting. So it wasn't like I had to, but I did want to contribute my songs, yeah. But in the other thing I could contribute was my guitar approach, and like what happens in the middle of Yours No Disgrace is a guitar break that I had kind of like designed, as we sat in the room. Guitar takes over, it goes don, ding, ding, okay, you stop, right, don, ding. So I was kind of like able to arrange, as all the band were at the times when they needed to step it up, if it's a keyboard position or drum position, bass position. Everybody had ideas, and that was the great thing about it. So you never had an idea without somebody else saying, oh yeah, but if you change, there was always more ideas. So the Yes album was really an arrangement experiment, where we took some very simple ideas and built them up into the much bigger affairs where there are very few introductions that are shorter than a minute or so,
Oh, yeah.
And so we basically started to, I think, put the blueprint down for the Fragile, Close to the Edge, Tales and Topographic Oceans. We kind of put the blueprint in place then. And, who wrote the songs was less important, although, of course, you knew you wanted to be credited. And and paid, on your writing, but it was very much a hit and miss thing where that kind of lay. But the important key was to get this band to sound different, be different. I think it was the originality of the other guys. The point I might have missed when you asked me previously about what did I think about the guys. I think one of the most important things really was that they were original. That there wasn't a guy there who was doing the same old. They all had this streak of originality, which was terrific.
You mentioned Yours Is No Disgrace, and we were talking about song credits. As I recall, that was credited collectively. Was that based more on collaboration, or I'm going to use the word segmentalization? And I only ask in that way because based on the structure of the song, I can almost see different band members bringing different parts and then figuring out how to transition them. But then at the same time, I could also see how it could be more of a traditional team brainstorming effort. Which more was it, or was it a combination?
I don't know. I mean, it was, how ideas got developed was part of the skill that we were using. But I mean, I think that was credited to the band because it was a fair credit. I mean, it may be unfair in some respects that John gave up maybe a little bit more of the lyric writing than he did. But in a way, what Yes did was we broke tradition with this old theory that there's 50-50, 50% of the credit goes to the writer of the lyric and 50% goes to the writer of the music. That we all found that a bit kind of unrealistic, really, because the success of the song is based on, quite a few other ingredients that go towards it. So Yes we considered ourselves to be breaking with that old tradition of the old songwriter, 50-50 lyric thing, and just throwing it out in the open and saying, look, here's 100%. And on that song, everybody did stuff. Everybody had ideas which brought it to fruition. It wouldn't be that. But we didn't do that on every song, But we did find, it's kind of confidential. I'm not going to tell you much more. But later on, we found ways of doing similar things to albums that might look like, John and I wrote lots of it. But in fact, what we gave back to every person in the band for their contributions, for their smaller contributions, other than structure. Normally, songwriting is about structure, the structure of the music, the chord sequences, and also the lyrics. But in Yes, we had to show appreciation in different ways because, John and I might come in with a song, but by the time we worked it up with the guys, people have put in their ounce of, sweat into it. So we would credit that off the record, if you like, and we would share in a group credit. But we did it on the Yes album literally as a group credit, and other times we did it more in a different method. But we always paid respect to the talents of the band when we could.
You also mentioned Starship Troopers. To this day, still a fan favorite, certainly one of mine. Truly a multi-layered masterpiece. Is it true that, and I read this somewhere, and that's why I wanted to ask you, that the Disillusion section originally came from an earlier Yes song? I think it was called Maybe for Everyone, and that the Worm section came from yet a different song, like from one of your prior bands?
That's right. I can't vouch for whether that. As far as when you were talking, then I was thinking you were about to say that fundamentally that section was written by Chris, and that's what I would say. That segment. He didn't imagine it was going to have country picking guitar, but when I played the chords, he said these are the chords. There's 4 chords. This. It was just E, D, G, A. And I made them 6, which gave them a kind of a happy kind of feeling, even though it's sort of disillusioned. But basically, so there was that. So that's an example. Yeah, as far as I knew, Chris wrote that bit, and I gave it a bit of a country picking thing, and the band stopped playing, and it was just a relief moment, if you like. So it was understated. There was no other orchestration except a guitar, which was suited me fine being the guitarist. When we go to what happened to Worm, you had. Back in 68, 69, I was in a band called Bodast, and we really struggled. I mean, this was really one of my worst struggling periods ever. really on the breadline. And, we got dropped by this label who had signed us. And basically, we'd recorded a song it was actually called The Ghost of Nether Street, but I think it ends up being released called just Nether Street. But anyway, it was really called The Ghost of Nether Street. And in there, I go over my own chords. And that was part of the structure I added to a song written by Clive Skinner. And basically, what happened was just before, one of the reasons I joined Yes, and I was available, was that they axed us and they dropped the recording. So I imagined, and anybody would have thought, that I was never going to hear those recordings again. Well, it was partly through my own work that people did hear them, and this is why. So we're doing, the Yes album, and I say, well, I got these 3 chords. It's a G with a D root, and it's an E flat with a B flat root, and it's a C with a G root. And so it was, that's pretty cool. And they start playing, and they go do 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 do, and I play that theme, of course, thinking, okay, I wrote that, and now it's going to be with Yes. So I was happy. But in 78, I was on tour, and I got a very dramatic message. I got a telegram that somebody had passed away, and it was Clive Skinner, or Muldoon. I think he screwed up his second name and called himself Muldoon or something. But I think his name, anyway, he passed away very tragically, very lonely, and he was a terrific singer and writer. And he really felt disillusioned. The world had turned their back on him, and I had as well. I'd rushed off to Yes, and, by 78, you can imagine Yes were a pretty big band in the UK, in the world, in fact. And Clive was kind of lost nowhere. So I wish to hell I'd stayed in touch with him. But as it happened, he passed away. So then I thought, just out of respect for Clive, so I called the other guys in the band, Dave and Bobby, got in touch with them, and I said, how about we get those recordings and we release them, So somehow we managed to do that. The label, anyway, maybe I shouldn't tell you too much, background about it, but somehow those tapes were procured. Yeah, because my friend Keith West, who is the singer in Tomorrow, was the band before Bodas, which should never have broken up because it was a fantastic band. But basically, he was a producer. So I think over the years, he'd acquired the rights to those recordings and didn't know what the hell to do with them. And suddenly I called him and I said, I want to put this out because Clive's passed away. And I think, people should know what a great singer he was and all that. So, of course, as we're doing the tapes, I got together with Gary Langham, who's a top engineer in the UK. And we went to Psalm East, which was a studio Yes was going to be using soon on Drama album, actually. So I'm there with Gary, and we mixed the whole album in a day. Wow. I mean, it was only I guess it was a 4-track album, recorded in there. I think it was a 4-track album, so pretty easy to record remix a whole album in a day if it's only got 4 tracks. You haven't got much to play around with every song. On there was The Ghost of Nether Street, So, of course, it starts out, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, everybody's going to people will kind of connect with this. But so, in a way, that's a pretty long version of the story, but I can't explain it in another way. It did come about in the end being heard by the rest of the world because I wanted it to be, but not primarily, nothing to do with Nether Street, really. But just because of Clive,
Just respect.
So there you are, tragedy and triumph. They all happen at the same time.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to Steve Howe for joining us. Steve will be back again next week to finish up our interview, so please tune in. Stay safe, everyone.